swallowed the red pill back in 2008 and began reporting the news in front of a camera in 2019. In that time, we've seen a complete upheaval in world politics. The battle lines have changed between the illusion of left versus right to the reality of globalism versus nationalism. Despite all the information, the truth and the lies, there are two very distinct pathways emerging. Should we follow Labor and Liberal to a dystopic one-world government, or do we fight for our nationalism, unlock our hidden resources wealth and build a new Australia? With the world teetering on a knife's edge, should we solidify our relationship with the USA and become the 51st state? This is my mission statement here on Australian National Review, and I welcome you to Black Pill me as hard as you can as we determine our future together. This is the 51st state. Hello and welcome to the 51st State. This is the only show you'll find anywhere in Australia or the United States that challenges the status quo for how we see the world, coming from the great nation down under as we look to the United States in a world that is turned upside down. Globalists versus nationalists. Which side are you meant to be on? And in fact, is there even a side? Left versus right? Gone. A thing of the past. And so today we're going to head back to the US and explore the crime wave and what's happening under President Trump with the executive orders, the National Guard, a very different outlook as we learned just today that Ishmael Zambada El Mayo has pleaded guilty for a lifetime worth of crime with the Sinaloa cartel and will spend the rest of his life locked up behind bars, according to Attorney General Pam Bondi. But that, of course, is just the start. If you are talking about a world that has been taken over by criminals at the very top of the pyramid, the tip of the spear, how do you take them down? And we're going to explore that and a whole lot more with a man who is unlike anyone that you will meet. I will introduce him to him in just a moment.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
Nils Grevillius got his start as a soldier, conducting clandestine security, border and counterinsurgency operations in the Pacific, Mediterranean and Latin America. On a contractual basis, he also conducted private operations in various nations. Now he's an LA-based private detective, and he's also investigating without regard to local or national borders, with the ability to deliver factual information quickly and efficiently from every state in the US and every continent in the world. He's also going to be, well, he is an author, and he's going to release a new book next year called The Last Lawman, True Stories of a Private Detective. Nils Grevillius, welcome to the 51st State.
It's my sincere pleasure, Mr. Olborn.
Thank you so much for taking the time today, and what a story you have already. And we're going to continue to look inside as we compare notes over what's happening in the US. But it's been certainly a career well over 30 years now. How did you start? What made you make the decision, first of all, to become a soldier, then move into the world of being a private eye?
My own start, Mr. Olborn, started with failure. I didn't do well in school. It never interested me. It was rough on me in all of the predictable ways. If I could have enlisted in the Foreign Legion at 13, I would have. The soonest I could find my way into military service was my 17th birthday. My father laughed at me, signed the papers, and said, the Army is a chicken shit outfit, but they will kick your ass and you'll be begging me to come home in 2 weeks or whatever. He was a Marine, of course. And so I stayed gone 7 years with it, Mr. Olborn. So I went from being a scout in the infantry, working the DMZ in Korea, and then got recruited to certain intelligence duties and did okay with the work. I just, off duty, I'd get bored and get in trouble, as you can imagine, and then found my way doing other things. And then I got recruited by the Pinkerton service in Los Angeles after the Army. And the Pinkertons are the oldest private detective outfit in the world. And they had me ranging operations all over North America, doing this and that, protective work, surveillances, industrial undercover, identifying unsubs, everything the FBI does or used to do, but charging private money for private cases. And so that was how I got my start. And in 1992, I decided I would have my own operation.
That is certainly is something that you would expect that maybe you had seen, or what, TV series, a movie. It is such the American story in many ways, the land of opportunity, that that it's such an exciting career coming out of what you said. You didn't like school, so you went against what the system was. Even your own father's giving you a hard time for joining the army. But this is the American way, to resist and to stand on your own 2 feet and to take on this adventure. Was it an adventure, or was it something that was born out of necessity, therefore?
How about a little bit of both, Mr. Olborn? A man has to earn a living. I entertained ideas of becoming a lawyer, but I'd look at myself in the mirror and I'd wonder, my parents were married. Was I capable of being a lawyer? So I found my way to this, and it's paid me well. I don't do it for the money necessarily. Yes, I like being paid, but I like the pursuit. And to be honest with you, Mr. Olborn, I don't want your viewers to think I'm some holy saint. I'm not. I'm Hessian to the very bone. If I was employed by a bank in my younger years, I would just sit there all day fantasizing, how do I tunnel into this place overnight? So this is a better way for me to spend my time.
So given that, and I'm just thinking right now, characters such as the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can. I mean, this is the image, I suppose, that we think of, is that you are dealing with characters like this. And of course, in a world of, clandestine operations that you've explained there, what type of security might you have been involved with in such a circumstance?
Security of what? My work is going after men. Other people will talk about locks and codes and encryption and technical this and that, and all of those things are very important. I don't want to give them short shrift, but one of the first things one learns in military intelligence, in the American service, and I'm sure the Australian service as well, is there is no device of security calculated and executed and constructed by man that cannot be defeated by another man. So it is better to defeat the man than the device. And all true hackers, good computer hackers, yeah, they're great at ones and zeros and figuring this and that out and pattern recognition and that sort of thing. But ultimately, the way that they break into your system is by defeating a man or a woman, getting the unknowing or knowing assent of somebody within your system who gives it all up. And I'm one of those men who figures out a way to re-engineer your people to get them to do things for me.
It's well, goodness me, it is a story to want to dig down, obviously a whole lot further. But let's sort of explore therefore. So, can you paint a picture? You're involved with surveillance or following along, and here we're looking about, for example, the LA Kings. What happened there?
Well, the owner of the Los Angeles Kings borrowed money from a lot of institutions and defaulted on a rather large loan with Bank of America, and wound up in bankruptcy court, and provided the trustee with a schedule of assets that didn't match reality. And so the bankruptcy trustee hired certain people, and ultimately myself, to identify where some of those assets were. I don't want to violate attorney-client privilege, so I'll just talk generally. I'll give you something that we worked on. What if one of those assets was a series of racehorses belonging to a concern called Summa Stables, and the racehorses couldn't properly be accounted for? And what if I reached out beyond borders using an agent in the Toronto Jockey Club? Their security force are, or were at the time, deputized by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And they made inquiries on my behalf. And what if some of the horses were ultimately located in New Zealand and Ireland when they were supposed to have been disposed of or lost in a fire, that kind of thing? To understate one's assets is a crime under the bankruptcy code. And ultimately, our work led to Mr. McNall having to take a criminal plea and do some prison time. He's an interesting character, though. He got his start in gold coins and smuggled antiquities and things like that. And then I believe he used to hang out at Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia, California, with the Hunt brothers, Nelson Bunker Hunt. Remember, the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market in the 1970s. Can you imagine? So McNall makes for an interesting study, and he took risks and ultimately paid a price. I don't think he's a terrible man, but he did some bad things. I once worked on an Australian who you may have heard of. Have you ever heard of Pattinson Hayton? Yes. And so he had some things going in California, including a couple of strings of polo ponies. And he had some creditors and things like that. And his wife had an Argentine lover, a man who liked to climb aboard a polo pony once and again. And one night while Hayton was at dinner, his wife's lover got shot dead in the horse stable. And then a couple of men may have been convicted of murder for hire. And Hayton fled to London and then died of a heart attack, quote unquote. Only I've never been perfectly satisfied that Scotland Yard identified the body as actually being that of Pattinson Hayton. They insist, but I've never seen that they actually took the fingerprints or ran the DNA of the dead body that they had. Now, I'll remind you that Hayton was a rough and ready individual, classic Australian risk taker. The man would eat martini glasses as a party favor.
You have just scratched the surface of a question that I didn't think I would be able to ask today, but I might just bring it up earlier. I have said for some time now that the last taboo would be faking one's own death. And if you could grasp that concept as a possible reality, it opens or closes the doors to almost anything and everything in terms of how you could cover up crimes going forward. Now, you've described covering up financial assets as part of a bankruptcy case. Have you ever had to explore someone like you've just mentioned with Hayton, the possibility of body substitution and therefore the implication of faking one's own death?
I've looked at this in investigations a few times. I can't get real specific on any going case, but I'll ask you a question in return, Mr. O'Bowen. Do you know the difference between fingerprints and DNA? I mean, from an evidentiary and forensic point of view. Okay. Fingerprints cannot be faked. DNA can. That's an interesting statement now, isn't it, Mr. O'Bowen? Right. So, an enterprising mech could do a disappearance, be immediately cremated, and leave behind a DNA trace at a purported death scene that might satisfy a casual investigation. But why be casual about something like that, right? The problem is that most men who are psychopath enough to need to launder their own identity to that extent are too undisciplined to maintain the new identity and walk completely away from the old one. And so there's always overlap, if you will. There's never a perfect seam between the two. That's my experience, anyway.
Well, that certainly it means that at least that there are people that have attempted this in the past. Is that
Many
accurate?
times. Many times. It's the oldest trick in the book.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, look, if you went back to World War II, there were those that would argue that, according to the JFK files, they have got information that Adolf Hitler ended up in Argentina. That would be probably the most possible high-profile case that in history. You've got Ghislaine Maxwell the other day coming out and saying that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. And then, of course, no evidence to prove, well, otherwise, or to suggest. Meanwhile, there's a missing minute. There's a body on the gurney, confusing but not clear. Looks like Epstein from the side, but it could have been, for all goodness sake, it could have been Tony Rodham on that gurney and substituted. There is, possibility of substitution even in that case. What I'm getting to is that when you're dealing where we are at the moment in history, some of the biggest potential crimes, Russiagate on its own, potentially that treason being committed against a sitting president, all bets seem to be off at this stage. We've got the Epstein files, where you've now got both sides of the American political divide, Republicans and Democrats, screaming for the Epstein files for information that potentially, very powerful people that are controlling yours and my lives are involved with such a horrific scenario. Why wouldn't it be the case that that this could be going on? I mean, once you break one rule and you've got to then cover that up, is there any limit to what someone might do to protect their identity?
Well, what if these are the actions of institutions, Mr. Olborn, rather than the actions of an individual? What if we've looked at Epstein incorrectly? Let me ask a few Socratic questions here. Why is Ghislaine Maxwell still alive? Why did Ghislaine Maxwell not flee to France or Belgium or someplace that would not have extradited her? I mean, she holds tripartite citizenship. And remember, her father, Robert Maxwell, fled Czechia in the 30s, sort of a wanted man, if you will, and then served in the British military during the Big War. And after that, maintained a profile that looks remarkably like MI6 to my eye. Okay, so what if she was the case officer and Epstein was merely the caretaker of the operation, and the operation was a multi-agency honey trap? Okay, and then you look contextually at what was going on in the United States. The man placed in charge of all the Epstein materials was Jim Dennehy, special agent, FBI, Southern District of New York. Now, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are up for what? Child trafficking, sex trafficking of minors, that sort of thing? That's criminal activity, right? Why would you place a veteran counterintelligence man in charge of a sex trafficking issue if it wasn't a long range honey trap? And we don't know which agencies are involved. I'm just speculating. I'm asking Socratic questions here. I don't think it's the Israelis because they don't screw things up like this. What if it's MI6 and CIA and everything was going apace with them bringing in important men so that they could target the men in the next two rungs down? Rather than targeting Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, they were actually looking at the men who came in with them for exploitation, for manipulation, for extortion, with the extortion done by third parties heretofore unknown. Why did Jim Dennehy quit the FBI the day after Pam Bondi ordered him to produce every report, every shred of evidence, and have it immediately shipped to her office at the Attorney General's office? What if Jim Dennehy took it out of the realm of criminal investigation and placed it over onto the side of counterintelligence, which is what they did with Crossfire Hurricane? Of course, John Durham didn't get to look at 90% of the material from Crossfire Hurricane. How could he have come up with a positive result after 2 years of investigation if he couldn't look at the evidence? That was only recently revealed. So why did Jim Dennehy quit? He said initially that it had something to do with Epstein and Bondi's order. He went out with his hair on fire and told everybody in the office to resist and dig in and outlast the Trump administration. And then 3 days later, the New York Times publishes an 11-page article about how he was horrified and offended that Donald Trump had pardoned the mayor of New York City for political corruption. Again, a mayor involved maybe in criminal activity. What does a counterintelligence man? Why would he care about that? Why wasn't he horrified by the behavior of Joe Biden pardoning his entire family and 68,000 other people? His own son involved with the Ukrainians and the Chinese. It does, none of it washes, if you ask me, Mr. Olborn, and I don't think we've seen the end of it. Yeah, maybe Donald Trump says this and Pam Bondi says that. I trust both of them far more than I would trust anybody from the Biden administration or any of the people, the legacy people from the FBI who involved themselves in these things. Mr. Acosta in 2008, when Epstein was first prosecuted, was asked directly, why did you slap him on the wrist rather than putting the man in prison? And he said, well, this was part of an intelligence operation. Take him at his word. Mr. Acosta's not lying. So that's how I see it.
So if that's the case and it is an intelligence operation, where does it lead, do you think?
Well, I think it leads to this, that they exploited people and ran an intelligence operation, and some of it so compartmentalized that we would damage national security by releasing what the ultimate outcome of the operation was. I suspect that all of the first stages of it went, remarkably well, right up until Prince Andrew blundered into it. And that was probably when they got the order to shut it down. And that's when Epstein wound up being charged. Now, I believe that Epstein did put a ligature around his neck and hang himself, but he was supposed to be on suicide watch. Okay? So just hours before he was on suicide watch, his roommate was an assassin, Nicholas Tartaglione, who had committed 4 assassinations for one of the drug cartels. Why would you lock up a man who's a suicide risk with an assassin? And what if the last conversation that Jeffrey Epstein had with Tartaglione was something like, now, Jeff, you seem like a nice man. It'd be a horrible thing for me to have to come in here and do you in a manner that would be uncomfortable. Why don't you do you so that I don't have to do you? It'll be nice and done then, won't it now? I'm just asking. It's a Socratic question.
Absolutely. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because we're living in a world today that if you dare think outside the square, if you dare ask such a question, you're immediately criticised, mocked, for example, a conspiracy theorist. Here in Australia, there's this dreadful term called a cooker. And my question to that, or my response to that, is how can ignorance ever usurp inquiry? Here you are a private investigator, literally investigating circumstances where you're seeing real patterns emerging with real vested interests behind them, and you're asking the question, which it looks like an intelligence agency. You've just mentioned Jim Dennehy from the special agent from the FBI, Southern District of New York, suddenly, all of a sudden ask questions and then retreating. So what do we know about Jim Dennehy today? What was the outcome there in that circumstance when Pam Bondi pushed him for information?
He quit. The man quit his job. He didn't quit the office he was in. He didn't hand the file over to somebody else and say, I'd rather go chase Russian spies in Alaska. He quit the Bureau. He retired unceremoniously as a Marine Corps veteran as well. I don't think they have anything on him, as some might speculate. I think that he's in it up to his chin waddle. These men are more espiocrats than they are spies, Mr. Olborn. Where I come from, in my background, a spy or a spook is a man or woman who dons mufti and false documents and travels across a hostile border to conduct combat or intelligence or security operations in a hostile or neutral country, risking their freedom, their very life. You don't call some fat ass in a suit at the top a spy or a spook. You call them espiocrats. They're bureaucrats with the levers of power in an intelligence and security operation. and have men and women serving underneath them who are probably far better people than they are.
That term espiocrat technically would design the lever pullers within said deep state. This is appearing to be the true enemy of truth in the United States that appears to be controlling the world. Are these the same people that perhaps are going to be in the frame now for Russiagate?
Oh, potentially, but people at the top can't delegate responsibility. They can only delegate authority. Because of a Supreme Court ruling, I don't believe that Barack Obama could ever be effectively prosecuted for his role in this, but Hillary Clinton certainly could be. And then the other men at the top, like Clapper and Comey and Brennan, all of this bears looking at. And I think Ms. Bondi is onto things when I hear that she's going to impanel a federal grand jury in Florida rather than New York or D.C. I wouldn't trust a D.C. or New York jury pool to deliver anything approaching justice. I mean, how many Hillary Clinton voters does it take to acquit a character like Brennan? And again, I'm asking Socratically, there's much more to it. When they use the term conspiracy theorist, they want to mock and ridicule, when in fact none of this is theoretical. Everything they said was theoretical 10 years ago has come out to be true, or most of it has, or it's come out to be true in some wild, exotic, hybrid way that nobody could have foretold. Graham Greene and Jean Le Carré couldn't have created this in the turgid pages of espionage fiction here.
Very good point, isn't it? Yeah, exactly right. Well, speaking of which, I'm just going to put this up on the screen for those that don't or aren't familiar with you. This is the new book that's coming out next year, The Last Lawman, True Stories of a Private Detective, Nils Grevillius. But you also wrote this trilogy amongst other books. Look at this. Can you tell me a little bit about what is going on here? This goes back at least a decade.
Well, I wrote these a long time ago. I wrote City of Devils while I was in a Copenhagen hotel room, taking a break from hunting down two hookers who had witnessed a kidnapping in Hollywood, Mr. Olborn. I was doing a job that the Bureau, the FBI, had stepped away from and couldn't execute on, or chose not to. I was paid to cross several borders and bring that case in, which I did. But at loose ends, I decided I would just sit down, had too much Danish coffee, and wrote a 60-page novella. It's trashy crime fiction. There's no great revelation in there other than that I've got a bad attitude, too much vocabulary, too much Anglo-Saxon vernacular, if you will. That's what it is. I find them reasonably entertaining. My mother was horrified when she read them.
And then you've now gone in a different direction. So what's happening with The Last Lawman that's going to be released next year?
That is my professional memoir, Mr. Olborn. That is 30 years of me afield as a private detective in Los Angeles. I detail a bit of the work in the Pinkerton service and several cases that I had. I don't give up who my clients were, not ever. But I talk about some of the bad men that I brought in. We had a suburban psychopath in Pasadena, a mortgage broker named Brian Harrington, who stole with both hands and was a one-man crime wave in one of the wealthiest cities in the United States and got away with it over and over again, and finally committed a rape and then was on the lam. And the police came to me and asked me to help bring him in, and I helped bring him in. I kicked his door in and took the man at gunpoint. Then when he was in jail, he approached the Mexican mafia and attempted to hire them to kill his victim and her children. And I have a further theory about that I'm even working on today. He got acquitted of that charge. He got convicted of the rape and several crimes of theft and opportunism and that sort of thing. He's a psychopath and a registered sex offender now that we all support on the public dime, living down in Orange County, pretending to be a college student. But yeah, that's just an example of the type of work I do. A lot of people hear private detective and they think some guy in a dirty raincoat who follows you into a motel while you're shagging your secretary or whatever. That's not the work I do. I don't do cheating husbands. I don't do insurance claims unless an insurance company is desperate enough to pay my premium. Insurance companies don't like paying premiums, they like charging them. So, you know, I take on cold case homicides, kidnapping, recovery, conflicts of interest, corrupt public officials, people making threats under cover of the internet, things like that.
Well, you've just mentioned some huge subjects there. Corrupt public officials. What's an experience that you could share?
What if a man was under investigation by the organized crime strike force in Los Angeles, and he was committing arson for profit on a serial basis? And one of his attorneys was the city fire commissioner. That's not a conflict, is it, Mr. Oldbourne?
That's unbelievable. You would expect that this would be the subplot of a crime movie and solved in the first 15 minutes before the real story comes out. But this is a real life story.
Right. And how about a judge who keeps issuing rulings with no basis in law or the fact pattern in the case, and you can't figure out why it is that she would do that? And so you hire a private detective to figure out if she has some tie to the opposite party in your lawsuit. And then you discover that the real tie is to the opposing party's attorney. And it's a romantic tie.
Goodness me, it's just extraordinary, isn't it? So this idea that you've mentioned earlier about institutions, this is the point, isn't it? There is a line in the sand that the general public is not allowed to believe in any way, shape, or form that our institutions can be corrupted. And I'm reminded of an interview I watched with Noam Chomsky years ago, asked about that and conspiracy theory. And his response was, I refuse to believe in a conspiracy theory because I refuse to believe that our institutions can be corrupt. And it just seems impossible that that could be the case, as you've just described. Not necessarily a whole institution is corrupted, but once one part of it is corrupted and the cover up that goes on, and I guess Russiagate is a perfect example of this, that at that point, your institutions are infected with something that means that they can't possibly function normally ever again, or at least until it's corrected. But it's just such a shift in realities that you either do understand that or you completely refuse to. That's the point I'm trying to get to.
Well, have you ever read Edward Gibbon, Mr. Oldbourne? He wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. If you take a fulsome reading of it, you'll see that Rome started sliding down the toilet not too long after Julius Caesar converted it from an ad hoc republic into a dictatorship. But one of the signifying acts was when the Praetorian Guard started deciding who could be the emperor and who could not. And even Caligula's horse, I think, was once made emperor by the Praetorian Guard or their friends. And then the Praetorian Guard assassinating emperors. Is the Praetorian Guard so different from a corrupt FBI, NSA, CIA, that sort of thing? I mean, it's not as though these things are unprecedented. If someone reads history, everything that they could need to know is right at their fingertips. Earlier, you were discussing Mexico and this member of the Sinaloa cartel. I'll ask rhetorically here rather than Socratically, Mr. Oldbourne. What does Mexico not have anything that we? I mean, they have everything Australia has. They have everything the United States has. They have intellectual achievement. They have brilliant men and women. They have a rich culture. They have a beautiful country in many ways. They have great natural resources. They're a bribery culture, but so is South Korea. South Korea went from third world to first world in 35 years. Mexico is still struggling to escape third world poverty, is it not? Have we aided them by allowing them to export their labor problem? Have we helped them mature as a political entity and an economy by sending every able-bodied working class male and female to this nation to work and then send money home rather than them developing their own country? Why should Mexico ever develop itself when all they have to do is fight over the money flying southward, with three-quarters of their GDP directly or indirectly tied to narcotics? Are we doing something for them by having a porous border and allowing them to export Chinese fentanyl to our country, with tens of thousands of Americans being killed with fentanyl? You know, my governor here in California is this greasy character named Gavin Newsom, who's mobbed up with the Gettys and the Pelosi's. He says that firearms are the number one killer of young people in America. Do firearms pull their own trigger? Does fentanyl inject itself? Um, Far more people die of young people die of fentanyl in my state than six of them are dead every single day being hauled into the coroner's office just in Los Angeles County. Six a day, sometimes eight. They've got a year and a half backlog on toxicologies. Yet Gavin Newsom thinks he's going to be president of this nation. I wouldn't send him across the road with $5 for a bag of groceries, Mr. Osborne. He doesn't have, there are no good intentions without good judgment. And their alibi is always their good intentions. They utterly lack for them. So that's what we're dealing with. If we sealed up our border and required Mexico to deal with its Mexican problems, Mexico would change in less than a generation. Mexico would mature and develop. We call them the cartels, but really what the cartels are in Mexico is, we call it the Fortune 500 in this country. It's the power behind politics in Mexico. They're in three-quarters of their economy are the cartels. Yes, they wage violence, they kill people, all of those horrible things. But those are the men and women behind the power in Mexico. Why are we treating Mexico as if they're a co-equal at this point? And they're not. Some people think that Afghanistan is an Islamic theocracy. Afghanistan is a narco state like Mexico. Some people think Mexico is a Catholic theocracy. Thank God for the faithful Catholics and Muslims in those two countries, because they're the only people making those countries inhabitable for innocent people. Right? All right. So what is it that I'm just a private detective in Los Angeles? How can I figure this out? And the men and women leading my government can't suss this out with decades and decades and all of these resources at their fingertips. Why can't they figure that out? Well, they did figure it out. They just don't care.
Well, that's an interesting point there. We'll pause just for a moment. We're going to take a quick break, but that is something to explore on the other side. I hope you're enjoying this interview. Don't go anywhere. You are watching The 51st State.
Australian National Review is Australia's first real free and independent press. One with no editorial control by the elite, but a publication that can generate critical thinkers and critical debate, and hold those spreading mistruths and deliberate propaganda in mainstream media to account. News with a difference that will be educational, compelling, and create a platform for political and social change in this country, and address the real issues facing this country and the world.
And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest this hour, Private Detective Nils Grevillius. Before the break, we were talking about, goodness me, look, we're covering a lot of ground there. Mexican immigration, the idea of exporting the hardworking Mexican worker into the United States. And is that doing a service or a disservice to the people of Mexico? And this is the great anomaly in the thinking today of left-right politics. I didn't think we'd go down this pathway, but the world seems to be, and here in Australia, we have a Prime Minister who is importing people at a record rate. A country with 26 million people importing 750,000 a year on tourist visas, for goodness sake. So we're not ticking any of the boxes in terms of how we're going to build up our own country. And what's happened is that there appears to be a shift. It's no longer about building your own country with the best of other people who'd like to leave theirs, but it's literally this belief that somehow that you're providing a service to the people whilst standing on the throat of the country in which you are importing people from, not helping out that country. So who are you actually serving in that moment in terms of humanity if you are literally treating other countries as second-class citizens but bringing them in and not necessarily serving your own country's interests at the same time? It's a profound question, a topic that you brought up that no one else seems to want to talk about, Nils. And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest this hour, Private Detective Nils Grevillius. Before the break, we were talking about, goodness me, look, we're covering a lot of ground there. Mexican immigration, the idea of exporting the hardworking Mexican worker into the United States. And is that doing a service or a disservice to the people of Mexico? And this is the great anomaly in the thinking today of left-right politics. I didn't think we'd go down this pathway, but the world seems to be, and here in Australia, we have a Prime Minister who is importing people at a record rate. A country with 26 million people importing 750,000 a year on tourist visas, for goodness sake. So we're not ticking any of the boxes in terms of how we're going to build up our own country. And what's happened is that there appears to be a shift. It's no longer about building your own country with the best of other people who'd like to leave theirs, but it's literally this belief that somehow that you're providing a service to the people whilst standing on the throat of the country in which you are importing people from, not helping out that country. So who are you actually serving in that moment in terms of humanity if you are literally treating other countries as second-class citizens but bringing them in and not necessarily serving your own country's interests at the same time? It's a profound question, a topic that you brought up that no one else seems to want to talk about, Nils.
Well, think about what wealthy men have a tendency to do. Not all of them. Musk did not do this, nor did Henry Ford. But the tendency to kick the ladder away from the tower after they've scaled to the top because they don't like to be competed with. It's an ego thing. Mark Zuckerberg could be characterized this way. Bill Gates could be characterized in just such a fashion. And the most deleterious effects of socialism and monopoly is identical. It's the artificial death of competition. Right. Once an economy stops innovating, then people are carving up a smaller and smaller piece of the pie every year. And it's the same thing in socialism. And it's not accidental that so many of these men and women who enjoy so much capital love to rub elbows with Marxists, men and women who don't want to compete with anything at any time. And if you're a working man or a working woman in a Marxist state, your competition is to derive the maximum benefit with the minimum amount of expenditure of effort. That's the competition, rather than competing to get more wages, better accommodations, better things for your family, that sort of thing. In a Marxist state like, say, Cuba, the fight is just how can I derive maximum benefit from the state largesse, such as it is, while doing the bare minimum.
This is the entire problem summarized in a sentence, and that's where we are at the moment. And the reality here is that we have an entitled population, and certainly a younger generation that is split between demanding that they are going to be the entitled one and the state will bow to every whim. To the other side, we have another phenomenon emerging amongst young men, particularly young men here in Australia, and certainly teenagers, that we have a gambling problem that's now emerging from as young as 12 years of age, Nils, where we're seeing reports of young boys involved with different types of gambling, and so that the poker machines, etc. So not even what I would call skilled gambling, like you might be able to learn how to play cards, or you might be able to learn how to bet at the racetrack, for example. This is just pressing a button and hoping for the best. And the reason given by some of these young kids is the fact that they don't believe that there is any chance for them to achieve the Australian, which is like the American dream, of being able to save up enough money to put a deposit down on a home. So it's not like these are bad kids following bad pathways, but what they're saying is that the system has failed them. And rather than becoming what I call financial nihilist, giving up and expecting the state to provide for them, they're going the other way and saying that I've got to take extreme risks and gamble my way to a fortune, which we know can only sort of be met en masse by failure. But it's a willingness, if you will, to try anything. And I don't believe that should be admonished, but it certainly should be educated against. But it's showing you that there is a fundamental failing in the system in this Western country that's meant to be the example that people want to come halfway across the world to join. It doesn't add up.
It does add up. If somebody is waging a psyop against your young people, when I say psyop, I mean a psychological warfare operation. And who is doing that precisely? You need to ask yourself, who's behind the gaming interests? What the random reward of gambling does is it rewires brain chemistry. It's the route to creating a generation of psychopaths, because random reward is the route to psychopathy, where everything that I do is based on the flow of endorphins rather than a calculated risk. The risks they are taking aren't true risks, other than it's a hollow risk. Okay, it's different if they were putting that money toward an enterprise or toward an education or something like that. I was listening to some radio talk show here on Texas radio yesterday while following a gypsy woman around Dallas. And the radio host was talking about the difference between concentration and diversification of money. What I did was I concentrated my investment in my detective practice. I invested in technology. I invested in my own education and training. I invested in relationships with other men and women who are skilled in the various dark arts that are peculiar to my profession. And then later, heading toward retirement now that I'm an old man who can't do much anymore, Mr. Olborn, I diversify a bit, investing in stocks and that sort of thing. But these young people that you're talking about in Australia, they're just throwing money away. Gambling, to gamble is throw money away. And it's one of the things akin to the four horsemen, as I call them, of the modern apocalypse. Searchable internet porn, which is actually software for the young male mind principally, but women too. It also affects women directly and indirectly. High concentrate cannabis, which induces paranoid schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder in a significant plurality of users. Fentanyl and AI, social media, artificial intelligence. One of the other ways to create a psychopath through random reward is to have a bot in one's phone, like in Blade Runner 2049. Remember, the replicant police officer had a fake girlfriend. What if I had a fake friend who ratified every negative act that I engaged in, every horrible statement I made, every lazy, selfish thing, and ratified my disinterest in sacrifice and accountability, which are the two things that make a man. The way that a male matures, even all the way back to the caves, Mr. Olborn, is overcoming the natural objections of peer group females. In other words, if I short circuit that through pornography, prostitution, abuse, rape, that sort of thing, I will never mature as a male. And you can define maturity in a male, Mr. Olborn, in that he can separate what he thinks from how he feels and use his emotions to flavor and color his rational life, and his rational life to keep his emotions from overpowering him. But to a man who's immature, there's no difference between emotion and intellect.
It's an incredible statement. I tell you what, you feel like that this should be the first thing that any kid is taught at school or by his mentor. How do you arrive, therefore, at such conclusions? Is this lived experience yourself, observation, or are you just deeply programmed to work it out?
I have to see it over and over again in the criminal acts of other men. Lifetimes of crime, like the homegrown psychopath that I characterized to you. He was rewarded randomly for negative acts for decades and became a psychopath. And let's define for viewers what a psychopath truly is. It's a man or woman with no conscience whatsoever. Once the conscience is gone, you can't reinstill it. And there's some known characteristics to psychopaths: the metastatic ego, the utter lack of concern about the harm that they cause in others, the parasite lifestyle, the ability to inculcate sympathy in civilian dupes and institutions. When you get some purple-haired, obese social worker out there saying, well, Mr. Olborn didn't mean to murder his entire family. He wasn't properly breastfed, you must understand. And really, his inner child wasn't adequately nourished with socialism and the school systems of Australia. And we just need a more robust Marxist social welfare network, employing lots of men and women like me with full benefits and able to retire at 50 with most of our salary and do nothing after that other than ingest cannabis edibles and that kind of thing. That's what they're looking for. Up at the tip top of the pyramid of the modern leftist society, when they take control of a state, a province, etc., you have the plantation class rulers. And then immediately below them, you have a lot of apparatchiks, NGOs, non-government organizations, which feed off of taxpayer money and reperpetuate the problem and deliver the votes of the people at the bottom of the pyramid who must struggle with it. And it's as if the voters, when they're actually allowed to vote, when the votes aren't manipulated or controlled because they won't wear an N95 mask in the voting booth or whatever the garbage they're going to do today, tomorrow, yesterday, whatever, they have a form of Stockholm syndrome, Mr. Olborn. They're hostages to it and they don't know it. And they think the people who took them hostage are their friends. Imagine thinking a tapeworm is your friend. And it's the perfect analogy. They used to sell tapeworm eggs in drugstores in America 100 years ago as a weight loss aid. This is your little friend. This is going to help you lose weight. And then it'll kill you dead. And you won't be able to take a cure for it in time. And that's what modern socialism is. And I will say that a lot of Australians, I have a lot of family in Canada, British Empire, right? They loved their social welfare net, their quote unquote free healthcare. But that was the gateway drug to dependency, to converting Canadians from rugged frontiersmen. Their Indians, their Scots, and their Frenchies were the hardest men in the world. And they were made into welfare eunuchs in a generation with quote unquote free healthcare. It's a 13-month wait for an MRI in Canada now. There are more MRI machines in Seattle, the city of Seattle, than all of the province of British Columbia, Mr. Olborn.
Isn't that interesting? Now, 2 points, one of which is in Australia we have an horrific youth crime problem that seems to have propped up in the post-COVID era in the state of Queensland and the state of Victoria. And of course, there's little being done in terms of deterrence, given that these people are underage, under legal age. What's your thoughts, and what have you seen by comparison in the United States there?
I have a pet theory on this, and you could go after my theory and tell me how wrong I am, Mr. Olborn. What if these young people just a few years ago were confined to their homes rather than attending schools, while their parents were sitting around at home also watching Netflix content and things like that, shows like Ozark and Breaking Bad, where the bad guys are the good guys. And the parents sit there watching approvingly. They're enjoying the criminality. If I don't condemn criminality to my son, is my son going to think that criminality is good? Well, gosh, my father sure is entertained by the criminality he sees on the screen. My son is 10 in 2020. How old is he in 2015? He's 15, right? Or in 2025, he's 15. And then he goes out, and what's the penalty for anything in California? I live in a consequence-free state. The only thing that's really illegal is beating up a man in a skirt. You can do pretty much anything else you want. You can rob stores. They're talking about having government grocery stores. If shoplifting is no longer prosecutable, isn't every store a government grocery store? Why pay for it? You know, I can just go down to the market and I can throw every single thing I want into the cart, and I can walk out in the state of California and put it in my car. What are they going to do to me? The next day I can do it again. And I'll have one of those obese purple-haired social workers who is the spokeshole for our district attorney saying, well, clearly this is a crime of survival.
Goodness me, this is exactly right, isn't it? How did we end up here? And again, who is running such a system that the cultural Marxists, if you will, this can only be a process to destroy the United States and collapse it into a one world government? Is there any other way to look at it?
No, I don't think so. And one of the things I've pointed out over the years is that all of these nice, cute hippies with the septum rings and the purple hair and this and then the tambourines, once they achieve perfect power, Mr. Olborn, they rule with an iron fist. When they are the government, they don't want you stealing. They'll gas you for it. How many million people did Chairman Mao have executed for the mere crime of owning property? You know, in 1937, when the Ukrainians were being starved to death under the supervision of the NKVD, all of those good Ukrainian Marxists looked at each other. You know, they were part of the Bolshevik Revolution. They were in the vanguard of it, many of them. And they said, wait until Comrade Stalin finds out what these commissars are doing to us. He's going to punish all of them. And they all died, with Comrade Stalin nodding from the sidelines approvingly. You cannot let a single election go. The water board, the dog catcher, the school board, any of it. So if you care about your system, there's no office that escapes the Marxists. They see every bit of it as a toehold to power. You have to sue them where you can sue them. And you have to do what they do in terms of they never surrender power, do they? When they get voted out of office, they just act as if they still hold that office. And the people who call themselves Republicans or Tories or whatever, they get elected to office and they can barely function. And everybody who's supposed to be working in their office is yet another union apparatchik who is a secret agent of the left. You know, who goes through the files at night and tells their friends in the media, what is this and what is that? And the media drives their getaway car. More often than not, news isn't faked outright in text in terms of, you know, the guy from Sky News Australia saying, today Jason Olborn robbed the Royal Bank of Canada. No. The way that they fake the news is when an ally of theirs does something criminal, they discharacterize it or they pretend it never occurred. You can't, you open up the news, nothing about it. And if it didn't occur in the news, my goodness, it couldn't possibly have happened. I think that's just a conspiracy theory, Mr. Olborn. There you go, making things up again. We're going to have to shut your phone off for the month, spreading disinformation like that.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Well, then, if we fast forward to the period of 45 and 47 and the second term of Trump in office, and we've seen the National Guard being used in Washington, D.C., and of course now even in Chicago. Just for fun, Nils, I'm just going to play you a short, very short, it's only a couple of seconds, a clip. This is taken out of Chicago Today, based on what we've seen out of DC and the crime and the arrests, 1,007 arrests in a very short period of time, 86 of them overnight. But have a look at this.
The National Guard has to come here, even if it's for a scare tactic. They have to come here. There's no control. There's no law.
How about that? No law and order in Chicago, one of the great cities of the United States, if not the world. Where are we today, and what is the plan, do you think, and is Trump the one to fix the United States, or is he the last chance?
I think Donald Trump will do this, but he's showing the way for men like J.D. Vance and women like Pam Bondi, women like Tulsi Gabbard. He flushes every shade of gray from the room. They tell him, oh, you can't do this. The mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, who might as well be the commissar of Cook County, says you can't do this. Well, when did Donald Trump back down from anything, Mr. Olborn? He doesn't. So he flushes the shade of gray from the room. He deploys the National Guard and federal officers to Chicago. Brandon Johnson will go running his fat keister into court and file some sort of an injunction, and there'll be some, heretic in a black robe who will immediately issue a court order against it. But Donald Trump will force it up the appellate chain very quickly, and things will start to change. And when citizens see it changing for the positive, it's almost like that magic moment at the end of The Wizard of Oz when the dog pulls the curtain back and you see the man yanking the levers of power as just some guy. And that's all they are. They're thieves. They've built an apparatus for themselves that's akin to a Ponzi scheme, a multi-level marketing scheme. And it's a system of spoils and power and protection by subscription, and we'll reward you with dog biscuits for feeding a steak, that sort of thing. And voters have gone along with it in places like Chicago for generation after generation. These Marxists aren't like the old good government Democrats who are also corrupt, like the Dailies, that sort of thing. In fact, Alan Pinkerton landed from Scotland in 1852 in Chicago and saw how corrupt it was and founded the original private detective service in that city. So they have a long history of criminality there. This is the first time, though, that they're openly celebrating their own corruption. And Brandon Johnson replaced an equally corrupt, unwise mayor in Lori Lightfoot. She was no different. They were cut from the same feculent cloth. The man steals with both hands, and he's dumb like a potted petunia. He has the intellect of a potted plant. That's it. He knows what he was taught. He took some garbage degree, a series of garbage degrees. At my expense, I paid for his garbage degrees from some state-funded arsehole factory, and he can spout all of the talking points of it, but what is he doing for the people of Chicago? Nothing. He's doing something to them. It's the public employee unions that prop him up. They have a fat, bloated bureaucracy and lots of NGOs there, just like in California. And the governor of that state, Pritzker, J.B. Pritzker, is a billionaire oligarch in a party that claims they hate billionaire oligarchs. He hopes to be president someday. He'll be fighting it out with the governor of California for the synthetic nomination of the Democrat cult. And the American political media, the international political media, will rally around them and coalesce behind them as if it's the second coming of Jesus of Nazareth, like John Lennon got yanked out of the grave and given a guitar. They'll love it.
Absolutely. What comes from here, therefore, Russiagate? Do you expect that there might be indictments through certain grand juries that have been suggested? And if so, could that change the Democrat Party structurally for a long time?
Structurally, the only way to structurally change the Democrat cult at this point is to take power away from them. And the way you take power away from them is to fire the people who prop them up, the NGO people. Take away the tax money that is flowing from taxpayers to government to the NGOs and back to that party. So you short circuit the money. When you start taking the money and some of these people have to work for a living, I mean, seriously, what would you say to someone with a struggle study degree in transnormative underwater pre-Columbian homoerotic poetry that cost $250,000 from Columbia, another arsehole factory? What are you going to say to them in terms of employment? What would you pay them to do? Paper or plastic? Supersize that Big Mac for me, mate. Okay, these are unemployable people. They'll have to get real. They'll be reeled back to earth. That's how you do it. As far as I don't like to call it Russiagate because it cheapens the whole thing. It was a deep running fraud perpetrated against American voters, also against the voters who voted against Donald Trump. They were told to believe that Donald Trump was a puppet of Putin, and many of them still believe that. But the way to disabuse them of that is to put these men in prison. John Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Hillary Clinton. These people need to face serious, serious consequences. The reason that they went after Donald Trump was because they couldn't punish his voters in the same way, so they punished him. They hold men like me in high contempt, Mr. Oldbone. They hold you in high contempt, I promise.
Oh, there is no question. Anyone who here in Australia who questioned the narrative of the last 5 years was punished. They were vilified, they were mocked, they were censored, they were taken out. Social media pages, thousands upon tens upon thousands of followers, gone in an instant. No right of appeal, no evidence used, no due process. That's just the way that the system worked. You're dead right, and this is the importance of what we're trying to achieve here through creating this show, the 51st state coming out of Australia. It has been one of the most profound, brilliant, enlightening discussions that I could ever have expected, Nils, to be able to tap into a great mind who has lived it, who has walked it, and you've literally seen it and been able to describe it from experience and observation. And I am absolutely delighted that we've been able to connect for this discussion today. And if it's possible, I'd like to publicly ask you if we can reconnect perhaps in 6 or 8 weeks at the other side of the House Oversight Committee investigations with Epstein, because I think that is just the tip of the iceberg about what we're seeing. What do you think?
I think that would be my sincere pleasure. I'd like to be on your show pretty much any day you'd care to include me. I hope I don't get you thrown in irons for my points of view on things Australian at this point. I think that the government isn't equal to the men and women who founded your nation, a rugged nation of frontiersmen and explorers and fishermen and men who made great sacrifice. The Aboriginal Australians were also rugged individuals. They were a perfect analog for the prisoners being landed ashore. Australia is a great place, and it can be made great again.
Yeah, not finer words could ever be spoken. It has been exactly right. Well said. Well, it's been a terrific interview, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time today, and I look forward to connecting again in the near future. In the meantime, I'm just going to put this up on screen for everyone. If you'd like to check out Nils's work in terms of these brilliant novellas that he wrote about a decade or so ago, please check them out on Amazon. And also, if you'd like to keep an eye out next year, the book, The Last Lawman, will certainly be some very, very interesting reading indeed. Well, thank you, Nils, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll conclude today's show there. I look forward to seeing you all on the next one. ANR.news, ANR headlines on X, or of course you can find me there, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, those two channels as well. But you've been watching the 51st State for ANR. Thank you. See you all.